Today we're looking at the issue of common management mistakes and how to avoid them. And with me I have John Lenton, who is eminently qualified to talk about these issues. And John, you're in your third career. So you started out as a senior vice president with American Express Europe, and you occupied a number of management roles there over 15 years or so. And then you went to Romania, where you set up the Griffith School of Management at Emmanuel University in Oradea, a Christian university, and served there for many years. And then you've come back, and you're now in your third role as a parish pastor in the Church of England in Hampshire, where you've been for 6 years. So you've got a wide variety of experience in management over quite different contexts. And I wonder if we could just start, because I know there's a lot of confusion about this issue. What is the distinction between leadership on the one hand and management on the other?
Well, Peter, as you say, there is a lot of confusion about it. Some people say there is no distinction between them. They're the same thing. And others have said, well, no, you lead people and you manage processes. That's quite a helpful way of thinking about it. I have the impression sometimes that leadership is seen as the good thing and management as the bad thing. You want to be a good leader. Being a good manager isn't seen as nearly such a heroic thing to do. I like the definition that one of my business school professors many years ago used in one of his books. He says that leadership is about coping with complexity, and management is leadership is about coping with change, and management is about coping with complexity. When there's change needed, you need somebody who will really march ahead nobly and tackle it. When you've got a complexity, what's often needed is the ability to see through the complications and to be able to take the clearest and simplest path. And that's often something that's called for, that calls for management skills and techniques. I suppose you might even say that leadership is something that people are often gifted with or not gifted with, whereas management is probably a learnable skill. And I suppose I've spent a lot of my life trying to learn those skills.
And to teach them to others. So a leader can be an effective manager.
Yeah. In my view,
perhaps
exactly.
Not quite so much vice versa then.
Yeah, I think that a leader needs to have good management skills. And I suppose my thesis in this talk that I've been giving at the forum is that leaders can have great, inspirational, imaginative initiatives. They can be creative and bring great presence to the things that they do. But at the same time, they can stumble and fall because of some simple skills, management skills, that they needed to have acquired. And so I suppose my point is leaders need management skills, and that helps them to do a better job.
One thing that none of us like is criticism, or that advisor that comes. Why is it so important for managers to be able to receive criticism? And can you perhaps give us some examples of good or bad situations?
I think it's important to surround yourself not just with people who nod in agreement at your every suggestion. The problem with that is that with surrounding yourself with yes men, effectively, is that nobody gets the chance to have a little debate about something. And a manager, a leader, needs to be able to hear voices of opposition, if need be. If somebody, if I put an idea out on the table and everybody nods to it, then it doesn't get modified at all. What I really need is somebody to say, look, I'm not sure that that's such a great idea, at least not in that form. Maybe it could be better if you did it this way. At times, I've found that it's possible to be able to say no to an idea, but to be able to provide alternatives that would do the job better. And I certainly value having people around me who argue with me. The requirement is really that we both share the same vision. We both have the same end result in mind. The question is, how are we going to get there? And so to have somebody who will disagree with me on the approach, but not disagree with me on the desirable end point, that's the most valuable that you can have.
How can we learn to get over our natural tendency of avoiding or sidestepping criticism, or simply not seeking it?
Yeah, we do tend to be defensive about these things. A man that I admire greatly, the president of the university where I taught in Romania for a number of years, Paul Negruț, he has two men that he sees at least once, perhaps twice a year, one in England and one in the United States. And the thing that he most values about spending time with each of them is that they ask him tough questions. They don't just listen and nod as he gives them a report about how things are going at the university. They ask probing questions, things that get to the heart of what's going on. It's not simply saying no, it is actually probing intelligently and asking questions that kind of put him on the spot, which help him, in turn, to take ideas home and to bring those to fruition because he's been challenged on what he's been doing. That's hugely helpful to a leader.
And I guess that's the whole part of the body of Christ, isn't it? That it takes lots of different gifts and roles in order to bring the whole body to perfection. So thinking about things from perhaps more of a Christian perspective in management, is there a role for grace in management, and what does that look like?
The very fact that people make management mistakes means that there's going to be a real need for grace. And if the consequence of a mistake is to be immediately cut off, I think that would be a terrible situation. So yes, a huge need for grace in business, as in any organization. I can well remember a story about the first president of IBM, Tom Watson, who he had an employee who made a mistake which cost the organization $1 million. And this unfortunate employee was summoned to Watson's office on the top floor of the building. And he went in fully expecting that he was about to get his marching orders.
And possibly a large bill as well.
And Watson spoke to him and spoke to him about a project that he had in mind that he wanted him to get involved with and to take the lead on. And after hearing all of this, the employee said, I really thought that you were going to fire me. And Watson said, you've just cost me $1 million in trading. Why would I fire you? You're never going to make the same mistake again, are you? It's an obvious point. The need for grace is enormous. We all need it. We do make mistakes. We fall over it on many occasions. But the wonderful thing about grace is that it goes on and on. In an organization, you probably can't afford the same mistake more than once or twice. thankfully, God doesn't stop at once or twice. He goes on and on, forgiving me when I make mistakes. But yes, there's certainly a role for it.
Well, in an organization of any kind, there needs to be allocation of tasks and delegation, and yet delegation is something that leaders often find very difficult. Why is delegation difficult, and are there any skills that we can learn and develop to make it easier so that we're not left exhausted and everyone else frustrated?
I think that's exactly the point. We don't delegate because we want to do it ourselves. The reason we want to do it ourselves is because we think we'll do it better, or we'll do it in exactly the way that we want it done, or we don't want to take the time to show somebody else how to do it, or we are fearful that they might make a mistake and drop the ball and it would all be over. Those are all understandable reasons, but they're not good reasons not to delegate. For one thing, we just don't have the time to do everything. Even in a role in a little country parish in England, I don't have the time to do everything that needs to be done. So I have to find people who can take on different roles. And my challenge is to be able to show them how to do it, to help them to learn, to correct them if they need it, but then to let them get on with it, and to be willing to accept that it might not be quite the way that I would like to have it, but it's certainly adequate, it's certainly good enough, it certainly does the job. We certainly have difficulty in delegating because of those reasons that I gave, but unless we want to go on having a life that is absolutely full of things that we don't really need to be doing, we have to be willing and learn to delegate. I think that it's a strange thing, but we go on hanging on to stuff simply because perhaps we don't trust enough to be able to let go of it.
And then we end up creating an unmanageable job for ourselves.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely.
Any biblical pointers or good and bad delegators?
Oddly enough, I was thinking about that a little while ago. And yes, I mean, the very first management consultant in the Bible, when I think about it, was Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, who came along and spent some time with Moses.
Just watching
it's in
him.
Exodus 18, watched him what he was doing, and he was just overloaded with people coming to see him. And he said, "What do you think you're doing?" And in the end, he suggested to Moses that he needed to delegate this role of this job of judging, settling disputes, I suppose, making decisions, making choices between different possibilities. He said, you've got to delegate that to leaders of thousands and leaders of hundreds, I think it was. And Moses, he said, Moses, you judge just the most difficult ones, but hand over the rest to other people. And I think Moses is called the most humble man in the Bible, and he obviously did it.
He could take criticism.
He took it. He took it.
Yes, and had a much longer life as a consequence.
And perhaps a pleasanter one.
And some good delegators? Good role models?
You mean in the
scriptures,
Bible?
Yeah. I guess the Lord, or
Jesus
himself.
certainly
apostles,
left it in the hands of 11 flawed people, and he's going on leaving it in
But they were well trained, weren't they?
He spent 3 years on training them and making them into the people he wanted them to be.
Yeah. One of the balancing acts in management is that, particularly for a busy CEO, you're busy. There's so many things to do, even when you have delegated things, it seems. And yet, at the same time, you've got the responsibility for setting the overall direction and getting everyone on board. How does one achieve the balance between the busyness and the chewing the fat and the strategic thinking?
I think it does, again, come back to some extent to delegating. You've got to pass on to other people some of the things that you do in order to clear the space for quiet, for strategic thinking, for planning and working out ideas that you may have. It's been said you should do only what only you can do. Mm-hmm. And I find that a helpful thing to remind myself from time to time. Mm. What am I doing that somebody else could be doing and could probably be doing better or at least as well? And can I drop that so that I can concentrate on what I really need to be doing? For a pastor, that is obviously above all preparing and thinking and about Bible teaching and preaching. But it's also about thinking about the future and doing some strategic planning. And I find that to do that, I actually have to consciously set aside time.
Mm. Do you take yourself physically away from the office? Or
yes. To take myself away to, friends of ours have a farmhouse right out in the country, a few minutes drive away. Mm. And so I deliberately leave mobile phone at home, just take computer. I don't hook up to their Wi-Fi network or anything like that. I just sit and write and think and try to plan out probably what the next big steps need to be. Mm. Now, if I have to do that at a parish level, somebody who's running a big organization, how much more do they have to do the same thing? I think taking yourself away out of the hurly-burly is probably a really helpful and effective thing to do.
I've heard it said that one definition of stress is when the mouth says yes and the heart says no. And saying no is something that often busy CEOs and managers find very difficult. But why do we find it so difficult to say no, and how can we learn to be better at doing it?
I think this is particularly a problem too for Christians, because we want to serve one another in love, and so when somebody comes and asks us if we'll do something, you really have a strong impulse to say yes. I mean, other reasons why we don't like to say no is we don't want to make somebody else feel rejected. We like to feel wanted. We like to have the sense that people are asking us to do things because they think we'll do them well. And so to say no seems to be an ungracious thing to do, and in any case, I'd like to do it. The problem is that, of course, if you say yes often enough, you will really fall apart at the seams. I think that what you see is that people who say yes to everything generally wind up not being able to deliver on what they've been asked to do. And to arrive at something unprepared or inadequately prepared, not having been able to put the amount of time into it, or to arrive at a deadline and not yet to have started the work, and to have to make excuses for why you've done it.
It might mean you're never asked again.
Well, that might be an advantage. But I'd hate to arrive at the never being asked again because of failing to do it, and that's perhaps one of our biggest fears. I think that we need to learn to say no because there is only a limited number of things that we can actually manage to do. What I've suggested to people when they're thinking about how to say no is really to stop and think before saying yes, and weigh up, is this something that I can actually do in the time frame that it's being asked for? Is it something that I can do probably better than somebody else? is there somebody else that I could usefully pass this on to instead of doing it myself? Or is somebody else's name that I could give who would do it better? And then if out of that comes an answer that really, no, I don't need to be doing this, then say no. And say no firmly and mean it. Don't say maybe and mean no. And especially don't say yes and mean no. And then later on have to come back and say, I'm terribly sorry, I'm not going to be able to do it after all.
And some people can be very insistent, can't they? But for some, no means maybe, and maybe means yes, and it just requires a little bit more.
Indeed.
Good communication's absolutely key to running an effective team. What are the keys to good communication between manager and employees, and what are the mistakes that people fall into?
I think one of the problems that visionary leaders often face is that they kind of build castles in the air in their own minds. In other words, they start to develop a plan, a thought, a creative idea, and it goes on a lot in their head, and they brood on it perhaps and work on it all the time internally, to the point where after a while it seems almost done and almost complete, and they still actually haven't said a word about it to anybody else. And when it comes out, it catches everybody else by surprise, and then that leader can be surprised because he doesn't understand why. He's been thinking about it for ages, and why are these people not responding with enthusiasm and energy and excitement to this idea that he's just rolled out in front of them?
And the way you describe it, so just because, why should people who aren't visionaries grasp in a second what a visionary took several months to develop?
Exactly. So, why should they? There's no possible reason why they should. But there's a certain amount of hurt and a certain amount of irritation that it's not happening. So much better, in fact, to try to bring out those ideas and start to work on them with others. That's really the key, I suppose, to communication. So often people in organizations feel that communication in our organization is poor, by which they mean I'm not privy to the plans, I'm being kept in the dark, so I don't know what happened, and things come along and they hit me as a surprise. And I hate being taken by surprise on things. And if you expose people often enough to surprises like that, then they will increasingly be wary and demotivated, and a strong feeling of not being communicated with.
And yet on the other hand, it's not necessary for everybody to know everything now, and it might be better for an idea to be well thought through by a few before it's presented.
Quite so,
to others.
And certainly that's the case. But at the same time, if everybody is familiar at the very least with the direction and the vision of the organization,
Yes.
where it's trying to go, so that everybody's on board with that, then as new ideas or new initiatives come out, if they fit with that and people can see that they fit with that, then the surprise is much lessened. So what is needed, in fact, is, of course, as you say, you can't make everybody privy to every plan and every opportunity that's coming up. But what you can do is ensure that people at least have the broad scale understanding of what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go, and that they will see how different new initiatives, new ideas are contributing to that process. Even in a little church, you can find people feel they're not being communicated with, they're in the dark about what's going on. I find it's absolutely essential to keep people up to date with what's going on, bring them in on what's happening as soon as possible, so that it doesn't take people too much by surprise.
They're much more likely to support you than to oppose you.
Absolutely.
Especially if they've been involved in generating the plan
Indeed.
themselves to some extent, or being able to feed back before it becomes
Participation
final.
is really key, or even just knowing about things so they can participate. I remember way back when I was at American Express, and the company was going through some difficult times. We had a new chief executive, a man called Harvey Golub, who really, and this was in the very early days of email, got things set up so that he could send an email that went to every single leader, every single manager in the organization, with the encouragement that they should in turn cascade it on to all their own staff. And the result was that I mean, now I suppose somebody could use Twitter or something like that, but even that is a restricted amount of words. He used to send quite detailed emails out saying what was wrong, what we needed to be doing, and what the steps the organization was taking in order to correct the problems. And that was being spread far and wide using this relatively new tool of email. We have fantastic opportunities with electronic communication. There's really little excuse for us to be not passing on information, not painting the picture for people so that they can follow it and get on board.
Just moving to another issue, succession can be a big challenge. And when we think of the scriptures, there are stories of great succession. Moses to Joshua, David to Solomon, Elijah to Elisha, the Lord, of course, to the apostles.
Yes.
But there are some bad succession stories too, and some of those involve very good people who didn't seem to make proper preparation to hand on. And many organizations are caught on the hop if someone should get another job, or illness could strike, or maybe even the Lord might call them home, and there's no plan about what to do next. So what's the leader's responsibility, and perhaps not just we're not just talking about, say, the CEO here, but also the board's responsibility in ensuring there's good succession?
Yeah, you put your finger on quite a sensitive problem here. Christian organizations especially often don't have the ability to build much in the way of management depth. You can't have people stacked up ready to take on the next role, because trying to run a fairly tight ship, you need to keep numbers well under control. And that means that it may be difficult to identify within the organization a natural successor to somebody who's leading it.
Yes, because at a big multinational, there are going to be any number of people who could then easily step up to the next role.
Yes,
but in
exactly.
a small organization, particularly a charity,
quite hard.
There might be no one on the
usually
staff.
Usually nobody. I think where there is possibly somebody, if a chief executive or somebody has a deputy who is able and who has the necessary gifts, that's great. But in that case, the chief executive, the top person, has the obligation to be bringing them on, to be developing them, to be ensuring that they've got the kind of skills, the kind of training they need to have, is perhaps giving them responsibility that would enable them to grow in their experience. So there's a certain amount of delegation there, but thoughtful delegation, intentional delegation, which pushes that person into taking on new responsibilities. But where there isn't such a person, then the chief executive needs to think: is it my responsibility to find somebody? But and it may be, if he's been tasked or she's been tasked with that by their board. But if it's not been consciously thought about, then I would say it's the chief executive's responsibility to be giving the board of directors a nudge to say, you do need to be thinking about my succession. I'll help, but you need to be the ones who are thinking about it, because it's not, in a sense, it's not the chief executive's appointment. In my own case, as a pastor of a Church of England parish, I don't have the responsibility to find my successor. My boss, the bishop, is going to have to do that. But what I can do, I can make sure that my church council is prepared for their part of the responsibility there, to be thinking with them about the kind of person they need to be bringing on board when I've gone. What kind of a minister do they want? And I want to be able to encourage them in some good directions, so I can be preparing them. I think it's the same for an organization. Thinking about succession is really, in a sense, one of the most important things that a board should be doing, and should be doing it regularly from time to time, because things change.
John, in Christian organizations, a lot of people are coming into management without necessarily having training in management skills. And how does one learn good management skills? Do you go and get an MBA, or do you get time to talk with someone like you, or is it reading books? Is it an apprenticeship? Is it a combination of these things? From your experience, what do you think is the best way for?
I think it probably is a combination. It's management education of one kind or another, an MBA or something like it, is hugely helpful in providing a lot of information, a lot of experience in a short space of time. I saw my 2-year MBA that I did years and years ago was like taking 10 years of experience and compressing it into 2 years. And that's very helpful. Experience is invaluable. It's irreplaceable in a sense. But you don't always have the chance to build that experience before being thrust into responsibility.
Yeah.
So education, training of different kinds is helpful. Whether it's a full-scale MBA or indeed something done in segments over time. I think that most colleges and universities have some kind of an external program which teaches the rudiments of management, the basic skills that are helpful to have. We've used here at the forum, we've tried to pass on some techniques which help a leader to manage effectively. And I'm involved, for instance, with the Cambridge Leaders Network, which does the same thing for a small group of leaders or potential leaders, in equipping them with some useful skills that they're going to be able to put into practice
So there's lots
in
of
their
good
workplace.
material out
Lots
there.
of stuff
And the
there.
scriptures, any particular things that really
Well,
have come from the scriptures
Yeah.
for you that have helped you in management?
I mean, Jesus himself, obviously, the servant leader. When I worked at American Express, one of my bosses was very keen on what he called the upside-down organization chart. An organization chart usually starts with the boss at the top, and then a line of senior executives, and then junior executives, and goes all the way down this ladder to the front line of people. And he said, no, you want to turn it upside down. The most important up there at the top are the customers, and then under the customers, the people who are dealing direct with the customers, and the responsibility of the junior managers is to support them. Senior managers support the junior managers, and the boss, it rests on his shoulders. He's got to support all of these people and
I
make
guess
sure they're working well.
he's got the board supporting him, hopefully.
Hopefully. And I think that was a very good set of principles. He wasn't looking at it from a Christian point of view, but of course that's what Jesus did.
Exactly.
When he washed the disciples' feet, he said, "If I, your Lord and Master, have done this for you, you ought to do it for each other." And so he was teaching by example the elements of servant leadership. I think things like Paul's instructions to us to be compassionate, to be tender-hearted, forgiving one another from the heart. I think a lot of that is needed in organizations.
And a lot of that's about grace and the fruit of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And so on.
How you cope with mistakes, how you handle people that go off the rails in some way.
And then just finally, John, any points, maybe one or two pointers that you wish you'd known when you started your long management career that maybe some people watching this video will be grateful to hear now?
Yes. I think that certainly one of them would be, I wish that when I'd started out on it that I had actually been walking with Jesus, because I wasn't. And I have found that both in my business and professional career and obviously in the things afterwards, that having Christ in my life and his word in my hands to read have really been fundamental in how I work. And then I suppose from that, some of the things that we've been talking about that I've learned from that.
There's a lot of narrative about good and bad management, isn't there?
I think there is,
Yeah.
and I've been able to learn a lot from that. I remember at one stage when I was contemplating a job change or a career change, and I was asking God, how should I deal with this? Should I? It seemed to me that up till that point, always the opportunities had kind of opened up for themselves, and I was praying. I asked God, should I wait and find out what you want me to do, or shall I get my CV out on the street and see what I ought to be doing, what comes along? And 2 or 3 mornings later, as I was reading my Bible, thinking about this same thing and still praying the same prayer, my reading that morning was the first part of my reading was in Proverbs 3. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. And it was as if it just came jumping off the page at me. I mean, it wasn't one of those occasions where you drop the Bible open and try and put a pin. It really was a prayer that was answered as God spoke to me in that daily reading. Yeah. And so I suppose over my career, that's been one of the things that I've found most valuable, to trust him with all my heart and lean not on my own understanding.
John, thank you so much for your time.
Peter.